There are moments when you don't need to scream to be heard, you just need to stay silent and let someone else dig their own grave. I sat there, not saying a word, watching the most confident man in the company transform himself into a failure within hours. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about who was in charge, but what he really did was hand me the knife, show me exactly where to place it, and then fall on it himself. All I had to do was follow his instructions to the letter. My name is Emily Parker, and at 38, I'd spent 11 years building my reputation as head of finance at Westbrook Dynamics. 11 years of early mornings, late nights, and the kind of loyalty that modern corporations neither deserve nor appreciate. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other coffee at 6:30 a.m., emails by 7, and in the office by 7:45. But the moment I stepped through those glass doors, I knew something was different. The office felt wrong. It wasn't just the unusual silence that settled over the cubicles like fog, or the way the fluorescent lights seemed colder, more clinical than usual. It was the energy, that particular tension that fills a space when power dynamics are about to shift. I'd felt it before, during layoffs, acquisitions, hostile takeovers, but this was different. This was personal. Dylan Harper was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the executive conference room, his silhouette sharp against the Seattle skyline. Even from across the office floor, I could see his posture, shoulders squared, chin lifted, hands clasped behind his back like some general surveying conquered territory. He'd been our new director for exactly 3 weeks, brought in from a competitor with promises of revolutionary leadership and disruptive innovation. The board loved him. The staff feared him. I simply watched him, cataloging every move, every tell, every weakness. He must have sensed my arrival because he turned, and our eyes met through the glass. His smile was the kind that never reached his eyes all performance. No substance. He raised his coffee mug in a mock toast, then beckoned me with a single finger. The gesture was deliberate, calculated to establish dominance. I took my time walking over, stopping first at my desk to set down my bag, check my calendar, make him wait. Small rebellions, but they mattered. The conference room smelled of his cologne, something expensive and overwhelming. Like everything else about him, he didn't offer me a seat. I didn't take one anyway. "Emily," he said, drawing out my name like he was tasting it. "Good morning. I trust you're ready for some changes around here." "I'm always ready to adapt to what's best for the company," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, professional. I'd learned long ago that the best defense against men like Dylan was to give them nothing, no emotion, no reaction, no satisfaction. He circled around the conference table, fingers trailing along its polished surface. "You know, I've been reviewing your department's processes. 11 years is a long time to do things the same way. Sometimes that breeds complacency." The word hung in the air between us. Complacency, as if the financial systems I'd built from scratch, the protocols that had saved the company millions, the team I'd trained to perfection, as if all of that was somehow lazy, outdated, irrelevant. "I prefer to call it expertise," I said. His laugh was sharp, brittle. "Expertise. Right. Well, we'll see about that. I have some new initiatives I'll be rolling out. I expect your full cooperation." "Of course." He stopped pacing, fixed me with what he probably thought was an intimidating stare. "I'm glad we understand each other. Emily, I'd hate for anyone to become redundant." The threat was so obvious it was almost insulting, but I simply nodded, offered a thin smile, and excused myself. As I walked back to my desk, I felt his eyes on me, probably already planning his next move in whatever game he thought we were playing. What Dylan Harper didn't understand, what men like him never understood, was that I wasn't playing his game. I was playing my own, and I'd been playing it much, much longer. The call came at 2:30 p.m., not an email, not a message through the company chat, a call to my desk phone, because Dylan Harper liked to make people jump when he spoke. "Emily, my office, now." The line went dead before I could respond. I saved the spreadsheet I was working on, took a deliberate sip of my now cold coffee, and made my way to the corner office he'd claimed as his throne room. His assistant, Maria, gave me a sympathetic look as I passed. She'd already learned to fear him. Dylan was standing behind his desk when I entered, hands planted on its surface, leaning forward like he was about to pounce. On his monitor, I could see file directories open our secure financial systems that he shouldn't have had access to yet. But of course, someone had given him admin privileges. Someone always did. "Close the door," he commanded. I did, then stood waiting. I wouldn't sit unless invited. I wouldn't speak unless questioned. Every interaction with him was a chess match, and I'd learned to never move first. "I've been going through the system architecture," he said, gesturing at his screen. "There's a lot of redundancy here, unnecessary files, old protocols, dead weight. Every file in that system serves a specific purpose," I said carefully. "We maintain strict data governance standards." "I don't need a lecture on data governance from someone who's been doing the same job for over a decade," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "I need efficiency, innovation. I need someone who can follow directions without questioning every decision." He clicked through several directories, his movements aggressive, impatient. Then he stopped, pointing at a file on the screen. What is this?" I leaned forward slightly to see what he was indicating. My blood chilled. It was the payroll master encryption file, the cryptographic key that secured our entire payroll system for over 1,800 employees. Without it, the bi-weekly payment run would fail catastrophically. "That's a critical system file," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "It's the encryption key for..." "It's labeled Legacy Key 2013. Legacy means old. Old means obsolete." He turned to face me fully, his expression triumphant, like he'd caught me in some terrible crime. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Emily, you're hoarding outdated files, cluttering the system. Delete it." The room seemed to contract around us. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and controlled. "Mr. Harper, that file is essential for..." "Did I ask for your opinion?" His voice rose, filling the space between us with his manufactured authority. "I gave you a direct instruction. Delete the file." I met his eyes, held them. "I need to be absolutely clear. You're instructing me to delete the file labeled Legacy Key 2013 from the payroll encryption directory. Are you deaf or just deliberately obtuse?" He was almost shouting now, his face flushing red. "Yes, Emily, I'm ordering you to delete that file. Today, now. In fact, I want to watch you do it." He spun his monitor around so I could access it, then stood back, arms crossed, waiting. The cursor blinked on the screen, innocent and patient. I pulled up the security terminal, entered my credentials, navigated to the file. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. "To confirm," I said, my voice perfectly level, "you're directing me to delete the Legacy Key 2013 file from the payroll system, and you want this action completed immediately." "For God's sake, yes, how many times do I need to say it? Delete the damn file, or I'll find someone who can follow simple instructions." I looked at him one more time. His jaw was set, his eyes blazing with the satisfaction of a man who thought he was establishing dominance. He had no idea what he was asking, no comprehension of the catastrophe he was orchestrating, and more importantly, he didn't care. He just wanted to win this meaningless power struggle. "Understood," I said quietly. I initiated the deletion protocol. The system prompted me twice. "Are you sure you want to delete this file?" "This action cannot be undone." Both times. I confirmed. Then, in the audit log window that Dylan couldn't see from his angle, I typed a brief note. "Critical payroll encryption file deleted per direct instruction from Director Harper, 2:37 p.m., following repeated verbal confirmation of deletion order." The file disappeared. 11 years of safeguarding that system, and it was gone in seconds. "There," Dylan said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Was that so difficult? Maybe now you'll understand that when I give an order, I expect it to be followed without debate." "Of course, Mr. Harper," I replied, my tone professionally neutral. "Is there anything else?" He waved me away dismissively, already turning back to his computer, probably looking for his next target. I left his office, walked calmly back to my desk, and sat down. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened my secured personal folder and saved a screenshot of the audit log entry I'd just created. Evidence, protection, proof. The payroll run was scheduled for Thursday, 48 hours until detonation. I returned to my desk and sat down with the deliberate calm of someone defusing a bomb. Around me, the office continued its normal rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the coffee machine gurgling its afternoon refill. Nobody knew that I'd just pulled the pin on a grenade that would explode in 48 hours. My hands moved across the keyboard with practiced precision. First, I opened the audit system, the one Dylan clearly didn't know existed, or more likely, didn't think was important enough to check. Every action in our financial systems was logged here, time-stamped, tagged with user credentials, and most importantly, completely immutable. Not even admin access could alter these records once they were written. I documented everything: the exact time of Dylan's call, 2:30 p.m., the duration of our meeting, 7 minutes, the specific file he'd ordered me to delete, his repeated confirmations when I'd asked for clarity. I wrote it all in the sparse, objective language of someone who'd spent years protecting herself with paperwork. No opinions, no emotions, just facts. Received direct verbal instruction from Director Harper to delete Legacy Key 2013 file. Questioned the necessity due to critical system function. Director Harper confirmed deletion order 3 times, stating non-compliance would result in termination. Action completed at 2:37 p.m. per management directive. I tagged the entry with every relevant category: system critical, management override, compliance under protest. Then I encrypted a copy and sent it to my personal email, the one the company didn't know about, the one I'd maintained for 11 years, just in case. The strangest part was how normal I felt. No racing heart, no sweaty palms, no second thoughts. I'd spent years watching people like Dylan Harper destroy good companies with their arrogance, and I'd finally been handed the perfect opportunity to let one of them destroy himself. All I'd done was follow orders, exactly as instructed, to the letter. I pulled up the payroll system architecture on my secondary monitor, the technical documentation that Dylan had neither read nor understood. The Legacy Key 2013 file wasn't just some random string of code. It was the master encryption key that validated every single payroll transaction. Without it, the system would try to process payments, fail to authenticate them, and lock itself down as a security measure. The built-in failsafe would interpret the missing key as a potential breach and freeze everything. The beauty was in the timing. The payroll system ran its preliminary checks at midnight on Wednesday, but the actual processing didn't begin until 4 a.m. Thursday. By the time anyone noticed the failure, it would be too late to stop the cascade. 1,800 employees wouldn't receive their direct deposits, the contractors wouldn't get paid, the benefit providers would flag our accounts. It would be corporate chaos. And the backup. The one Dylan assumed existed because he'd probably never run a critical system in his life. I'd actually suggested implementing one 3 years ago. The previous director had declined, citing budget constraints. The documentation was all there, in the files Dylan hadn't bothered to read. The warnings I'd submitted, the risk assessments, the paper trail that led directly back to management's decision to operate without a safety net. I opened a new email to myself and attached all of it, every memo, every warning, every declined request for backup systems. Then I added today's audit log. The subject line was simple: insurance. At 3:45 p.m., Sarah from my team knocked on my cubicle wall. "Hey, Emily, quick question about the quarterly reports." I turned, giving her my full attention, as if I hadn't just set the building on fire in slow motion. "Of course. What do you need?" We discussed revenue projections for 20 minutes. I answered her questions, reviewed her calculations, suggested improvements. Normal Tuesday afternoon activities. She had no idea that by Thursday morning, she'd be walking into a war zone. After Sarah left, I pulled up my calendar. Thursday morning, I was scheduled for a routine meeting with IT about system maintenance. Perfect. I'd be nowhere near the explosion when it happened. In fact, I made a point of scheduling myself for an early morning dental appointment on Thursday, documenting it in the system Tuesday afternoon, creating distance, establishing plausible deniability, even though I wouldn't need it. The audit logs would tell the whole story. At 5 p.m., I shut down my computer, gathered my things, and prepared to leave. As I passed Dylan's office, I saw him still at his desk, probably plotting his next power move. He looked up as I walked by, gave me that predatory smile. "Have a good evening, Emily. I trust we understand each other better now." "Perfectly. Mr. Harper, I replied. Your instructions were very clear. He nodded, satisfied, already dismissing me from his thoughts. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. When the doors closed, I finally allowed myself the smallest smile. He wanted me to follow his orders without question. I'd done exactly that. He wanted to establish his authority. He'd definitely done that too in writing, in the permanent record, with timestamps and authentication protocols that would survive any investigation. The elevator descended, and I thought about the 1,800 employees who wouldn't get paid on Thursday. I felt a twinge of guilt, but it would pass. They'd get their money eventually. Once the mess was sorted out, the company would survive. Dylan Harper's career would not. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about what you do. It's about what you don't do. It's about malicious compliance, about giving someone exactly what they asked for, and letting them choke on it. The history between Dylan Harper and me didn't start with that Tuesday afternoon. It began 3 weeks earlier, the day he walked into Westbrook Dynamics like he owned it, which, in his mind, he already did. His first all-hands meeting should have been a warning to everyone. Instead of introducing himself, learning about our operations, or showing even a modicum of respect for the existing team, he spent 45 minutes explaining how he'd single-handedly saved his previous company from bankruptcy. The story changed depending on who he was talking to, but the hero was always the same Dylan Harper, corporate savior. I'd done my research. His previous company had actually been saved by a federal bailout and 3 rounds of layoffs that gutted their R&D department. Dylan had been there for the last 6 months of the turnaround, brought in after the hard decisions had been made, the sacrifices already paid, but to hear him tell it, he'd walked on water. The first time he'd stolen my work was subtle. I'd presented a comprehensive financial restructuring plan to the board, something I'd been developing for 6 months. Dylan sat in that meeting, silent and attentive. 3 days later, he presented his strategic vision to the CEO, which was my plan, almost word for word, with one addition, a paragraph about leveraging synergies that meant absolutely nothing. When I confronted him, privately and professionally, he'd laughed. Emily, we're all on the same team here. There's no your idea or my idea. There's only what's best for the company. I thought someone with your experience would understand that. The way he said experience, like it was a disease, told me everything I needed to know about Dylan Harper. The second incident was more blatant. During a quarterly review, I raised concerns about our vendor payment processing system, a critical vulnerability that could expose us to fraud. I'd prepared a detailed presentation, complete with case studies, risk assessments, and a remediation plan. Dylan interrupted me halfway through. I think what Emily is trying to say, he announced to the room, is that we need to be more proactive about security. I'll take point on this. He dismissed my presentation, assigned himself as project lead, and then did absolutely nothing. For 2 weeks, the vulnerability remained open while he assessed the situation. When the CFO finally asked about progress, Dylan threw me under the bus, claiming I'd failed to provide him with adequate documentation, the documentation I'd tried to present, the documentation he'd interrupted. But the worst part wasn't the stolen credit or the undermining. It was the casual sexism wrapped in corporate speak, the way he'd always explain my ideas back to me in smaller words, as if I couldn't understand my own work, the way he'd direct questions about my department to whatever man happened to be in the room, the way he'd schedule urgent meetings during my presentations, forcing me to choose between attending and defending my work. You need to be more of a team player, Emily, he'd said after I skipped one of his ambush meetings to finish a board presentation. This isn't about individual achievement. Unless, of course, the achievement was his. I documented everything, every stolen idea, every undermined presentation, every misunderstanding that somehow always worked in his favor. My personal file on Dylan Harper was comprehensive, but I'd never used it. I was waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity. I just never imagined he'd hand it to me himself. The irony was that Dylan thought he was playing a long game with me. He saw me as an obstacle to remove, a remnant of the old guard that needed to be cleared out. He'd been building his case for weeks, questioning my decisions in meetings, CCing the CEO on emails that highlighted any minor delay, creating a narrative where I was the problem and he was the solution. What he didn't understand was that I'd survived 11 years in corporate finance. I'd outlasted 5 directors, 2 mergers, and 1 hostile takeover. I'd learned from every backstabbing colleague, every power-hungry manager, every sexist executive who'd tried to push me out. They'd all taught me something valuable: how to play dead while setting the trap. Dylan Harper thought he was hunting me. He thought that Tuesday afternoon in his office was another victory in his campaign to establish dominance. He thought my compliance was surrender. My questions were weakness. My calm was defeat. He had no idea that he'd just signed his own death warrant, and I'd made sure he did it 3 times, just to be thorough. The last time I'd been this certain about a decision was 11 years ago when I'd taken this job. Back then, I'd been naive enough to think that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded. Now I knew better. In corporate America, you didn't get what you deserved. You got what you documented. And I'd documented everything. Wednesday morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. like always. Coffee, workout, shower, breakfast, normal routine. The payroll system would run its preliminary check at midnight. By the time I got to the office, the countdown would have already begun. All I had to do was wait and watch Dylan Harper destroy himself with the weapon he'd forced me to create. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't about being right. It was about being patient. And I'd been patient for 3 long weeks, enduring every insult, documenting every transgression, waiting for Dylan to make the one mistake that would cost him everything. He'd finally made it, and he'd made me pull the trigger. Wednesday crawled by with the peculiar slowness of anticipated disaster. I arrived at the office at 7:45 a.m., same as always, but everything felt different. The familiar had become foreign. The routine had become performance. I was living in 2 worlds simultaneously. In one, I was Emily Parker, head of finance, conducting meetings, reviewing reports, answering emails. In the other, I was a ghost watching the living, knowing that in less than 24 hours, their reality would shatter. The file had been deleted for roughly 17 hours. The system hadn't noticed yet, but it would. At 9 a.m., I sat through a budget meeting with the marketing team. They wanted an additional $100,000 for a new campaign. I listened to their pitch, asked the right questions, took notes, all while knowing that by tomorrow morning, the company wouldn't be able to pay for coffee, let alone a marketing campaign. "Emily, you seem distracted," said Jennifer from marketing. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I replied, offering a professional smile. "Just thinking through the implications. This is a significant investment." If only she knew what I was really thinking through. At lunch, I sat alone in my office, unable to eat. The sandwich I'd brought sat untouched on my desk while I stared at my computer screen. The payroll system interface looked normal. No warnings, no alerts. The midnight preliminary check was still 11 hours away. The calm before the storm. Dylan walked past my office around 1 p.m., whistling. He stopped at my doorway, leaned against the frame with that practiced casual arrogance. "Emily, how's everything running smooth as silk? I hope—" "Everything's running exactly as expected," I said truthfully. Good. You know, I've been thinking about your department. There might be some restructuring opportunities. We should talk about that soon. Maybe Friday." Friday. He actually thought he'd still be here Friday. "I'll check my calendar," I said. He winked, and strolled away. I watched him go. This man who thought he was the apex predator in our corporate ecosystem, not realizing he'd already been poisoned. The toxin was in his system. He just hadn't started showing symptoms yet. The afternoon stretched like pulled taffy. Every email felt surreal. Every conversation felt like it was happening underwater. People made plans for Thursday meetings, discussed Friday deadlines, talked about next week's projects. I nodded, agreed. Scheduled appointments I knew would never happen. At 3:30 p.m., the IT manager, Kevin, stopped by. My heart rate spiked for the first time all day. "Hey, Emily, we're doing some routine maintenance on the servers tonight. Anything we should know about on your end?" This was it. The moment where I could say something, mention the deleted file, prevent the catastrophe, save Dylan from himself. "Nothing special," I heard myself say. "Just the usual payroll run Thursday morning." "Cool. We'll make sure everything's clear by midnight for the preliminary checks." He left, and I sat back in my chair. Another opportunity to stop this had passed. I let it go by like watching a train from a platform, knowing exactly where it was headed. At 5 p.m., people started leaving. The office slowly emptied, but I stayed, not because I had work to do, but because I couldn't seem to move. I sat in my dimming office as the sun set over Seattle, watching the city lights begin to twinkle below. Somewhere out there, 1,800 employees were going about their evening, assuming their paychecks would hit their accounts Thursday night, planning weekend purchases, counting on money that wouldn't come. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister, "Dinner tomorrow night." "Can't tomorrow," I typed back. "Friday." Because Thursday night, I'd probably still be here, watching the aftermath unfold. At 6:30 p.m., I finally gathered my things to leave. The office was nearly empty now, just a few workaholics and the cleaning crew. As I walked past Dylan's office, I saw he was gone. His light was off, his door locked. He'd probably left early, confident in his dominion over his corporate kingdom. I stopped at the server room on my way out. Through the small window, I could see the servers humming away, LED lights blinking in patterns I'd memorized over the years. In about 5 hours, the payroll system would wake up, look for its encryption key, and find nothing. It would try again, assuming a temporary glitch. Then again, then it would panic, shut down, and lock everyone out as a security measure. The elevator ride down felt like descending into a bunker. Tomorrow would be chaos, but tonight was still quiet. The security guard nodded as I passed. "Have a good evening, Ms. Parker." "You too, Marcus." I walked to my car in the parking garage, each footstep echoing in the concrete cavern. Once inside, I sat for a moment without starting the engine. This was what point of no return actually felt like, not dramatic, not exciting, just hollow and inevitable. My phone showed the time 6:52 p.m. In about 5 hours, the timer would hit 0. The bomb I'd been forced to arm would detonate. I started the car and drove home through Seattle traffic, NPR playing on the radio, discussing some political scandal in Washington. By tomorrow, we'd have our own scandal. Local news would probably pick it up. Tech company unable to pay employees due to system failure. Dylan's name would be in the reports. Mine would be in the solution. At home, I poured a glass of wine and sat on my couch, laptop open, watching the clock. 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Time moved like honey, thick and slow. I didn't watch TV, didn't read, just sat there, waiting, like a sailor watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. At 11:45 p.m., I logged into the system remotely. Everything still looked normal. 15 minutes until the preliminary check. 15 minutes until the beginning of the end of Dylan Harper's career at Westbrook Dynamics. I raised my wine glass to the empty room. "Here's to following orders," I said to no one. The clock on my laptop turned to 11:59 p.m. 1 minute. The system would run its check, find the missing key, and begin its death spiral. All because Dylan Harper had wanted to prove he was in charge. Midnight. Somewhere in a server room, a routine process began to run. Somewhere in Seattle, Dylan Harper was sleeping soundly, unaware that his professional execution had just begun. Thursday morning, 4:17 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. The cascade had begun. I'd been awake since 3:30, sitting in my kitchen with coffee, waiting. The first text came from Kevin in a T, "Urgent payroll system, critical failure. Please call immediately." Then another from Sarah on my team. "Emily, something's wrong with the payment processing. Getting errors everywhere." Then the automated alerts started flooding in. System failure, authentication error, security lockdown initiated. Each notification was another nail in Dylan's coffin. I waited until 4:45 before responding to Kevin. On my way in, start documenting everything. The drive to the office was surreal. The city was still dark, streetlights creating pools of yellow on empty roads. Normal people were sleeping, unaware that corporate hell was breaking loose 20 floors above the Seattle streets. The office was already in crisis mode when I arrived at 5:15 a.m. The IT department was fully staffed, pizza boxes and energy drinks scattered across desks. They'd been there all night. Kevin looked like he'd aged 5 years since yesterday. Emily, thank God. The entire payroll system is locked. We can't even access it to diagnose the problem. Walk me through what happened, I said, pulling up a chair, playing my part perfectly. Preliminary check ran at midnight. Everything seemed fine. Then at 4 a.m., when the actual processing started, it just died. The system threw a critical encryption error and went into security lockdown. We've tried everything. Dylan burst through the door at 5:30 a.m., his hair disheveled, shirt partially untucked. The polished exterior was already cracking. What the hell is going on? He demanded. I've got 47 missed calls. Payroll system failure, Kevin explained. We can't process any payments. Nothing's going through. Dylan's face went from red to white. Fix it, now. We can't, Kevin said. The system's completely locked. It's detecting a missing encryption key and treating it as a potential breach. Then restore it from backup. Kevin looked uncomfortable. There is no backup for the encryption keys. It was flagged as a security risk 3 years ago. The recommendation was declined due to budget constraints. I watched Dylan's face as the implications hit him. 1,800 employees, no paychecks, his third week on the job. By 6 a.m., the HR director, Patricia, had arrived, along with the CFO, James Morrison. The executive conference room became our war room. Dylan paced back and forth, barking orders that IE couldn't follow, demanding solutions that didn't exist. How does something like this just happen? Patricia asked. Don't we have safeguards? We do, Kevin explained. That's why the system locked down. It detected the missing encryption key and assumed we'd been compromised. What key? James asked. When did it go missing? Kevin pulled up the logs on his laptop, projecting them onto the conference room screen. According to the audit trail, the master encryption file was deleted on Tuesday at 2:37 p.m. The room went silent. All eyes turned to the screen. Reading the log entry I'd carefully crafted, critical payroll encryption file deleted per direct instruction from Director Harper. That's impossible, Dylan said, his voice cracking. The audit log shows it was deleted from your terminal, Kevin continued, scrolling through the data, using Emily's credentials, but from your office computer. Dylan spun toward me. You did this. I followed your direct orders, I said calmly. You specifically instructed me to delete what you called an obsolete legacy file. I questioned the decision 3 times. You insisted. That's a lie. Patricia held up a hand. The audit logs will show exactly what happened. Kevin, can you pull up the detailed entry? Kevin clicked through to the expanded log. There it was. My insurance policy displayed in undeniable digital clarity, file deletion performed under explicit instruction from Director Harper. Operator questioned action multiple times due to critical system function. Director confirmed deletion order repeatedly, stating non-compliance would result in termination. The room erupted. James was on his phone with the CEO. Patricia was calling legal. Dylan stood frozen, watching his career crumble in real time. By 7 a.m., the entire C-suite had assembled. The CEO, Robert Blackwood, looked like he'd been dragged through hell. He listened to the IT report, reviewed the audit logs, then turned to Dylan. You ordered the deletion of a critical system file without understanding its function. I was trying to streamline. You've been here 3 weeks. Robert cut him off. You made unilateral decisions about systems you didn't understand, ignored input from our senior staff, and now 1,800 people won't get paid. We can fix this, Dylan said desperately. There must be a way. The encryption key is gone, Kevin stated flatly. We'll need to rebuild the entire payroll system from scratch. Best case scenario, we can process manual payments by Monday, but it'll cost us overtime, expedited processing fees, and probably a few million in penalties from delayed vendor payments. The room fell silent again. Everyone was doing the math, the financial hit, the reputation damage, the lawsuits that would inevitably follow. Robert turned to me. Emily, you've been here 11 years. Is there any way to recover this key? This was my moment, the point where I could save him, produce some miraculous backup, be the hero, but I'd followed Dylan's orders, exactly as given. No, I said simply. The file is gone. We'd recommended implementing a backup system 3 years ago, but it was declined. That documentation is all in the system. Dylan's face was ash gray now. He knew what was coming. We all did. The executive conference room transformed into a tribunal. Robert Blackwood sat at the head of the table, flanked by James Morrison and Patricia from HR. The general counsel, David Stern, participated via speakerphone from New York. Dylan sat alone on one side of the table, the audit log still projected on the screen behind him, like evidence at a trial. I sat with Kevin and 2 other IT managers on the opposite side, witnesses to the execution about to unfold. "Let's go through this step by step," Robert said, his voice deadly calm. "Dylan, explain to me your thought process when you ordered the deletion of this file." Dylan's hands were shaking slightly as he gestured toward the screen. "It was labeled legacy. In my experience, legacy files are outdated, redundant. I was trying to clean up the system, improve efficiency." "Did you ask anyone what the file was for?" Patricia interrupted. Emily was there. She should have explained." "According to the audit log, she tried to," James said, scrolling through his tablet. "It says here she questioned the action multiple times. She didn't explain clearly enough." Dylan's voice pitched higher, desperate. "If she knew it was critical, she should have refused." David's voice crackled through the speaker. "Mr. Harper, did you or did you not threaten Ms. Parker with termination if she didn't comply?" The room went silent. Dylan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I may have emphasized the importance of following directions," he finally managed. "That's a yes," David said flatly. "So you threatened to fire a senior employee with 11 years of experience if she didn't delete a file you didn't understand, in a system you'd been managing for less than 3 weeks. Robert pulled up something on his laptop. "I'm looking at your resume. Dylan, the one you submitted when we hired you. It says here you revolutionized payment processing systems at your previous company." "I did. I oversaw the team that..." "Yet you couldn't identify a critical encryption key in our payroll system." Dylan had no answer for that. Patricia cleared her throat. "We've already received 17 calls from employees about their missing paychecks. The first one came in at 6:23 a.m. from a single mother who couldn't make her rent payment. By noon, we'll have 1,800 similar stories." "The wire transfers to our benefit providers also failed," James added. "Health insurance, retirement contributions, all of it. We're looking at compliance violations, potential lawsuits, and massive penalties." Robert stood up, walked to the window, his back to the room. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but furious. "In my 23 years running this company, I have never seen such a catastrophic failure of judgment. You didn't just make a mistake, Dylan. You bulldozed through warnings, threatened staff, and destroyed a critical system out of sheer arrogance." He turned back to face the table. "Emily, do you have any documentation of Mr. Harper's other decisions since he started?" I pulled out my folder, the one I'd been maintaining for 3 weeks. "I have several incidents documented, if they're relevant." "They're relevant," Robert said grimly. I laid out the papers, the stolen restructuring plan, the ignored security warnings, the undermined presentations. Each document was dated, detailed, irrefutable. Dylan watched his sins pile up on the conference table, his face growing paler with each page. "This is a witch hunt," he said weakly. "You're all conspiring against me." "No conspiracy needed," David's voice came through the speaker. "You've created enough liability to bury yourself, Robert, from a legal standpoint. We need to act immediately to mitigate damages." Patricia slid a document across the table to Dylan. "This is a termination agreement, effective immediately." "You can't do this. I'll sue for wrongful termination." "Please do," David said. "We'll be happy to present these audit logs and Emily's documentation in court, along with the testimony of 1,800 employees who didn't get paid because of your incompetence." Dylan looked around the room, searching for an ally. Finding none, his eyes landed on me, and for a moment, I saw pure hatred there, then understanding. He knew. He knew I'd let him do this to himself. "This was you," he said quietly. "You planned this." "I followed your orders," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Exactly as you gave them, without question, just like you demanded." Robert's patience snapped. Security is already waiting outside. Mr. Harper, you have 10 minutes to clear your office. Your company accounts have been suspended, and your building access will be revoked as soon as you leave. Dylan stood up slowly, like an old man. The confident, arrogant director who'd strutted into the office 3 weeks ago was gone. In his place stood a broken middle manager who'd just learned the hardest lesson in corporate leadership: competence matters more than confidence. 10 minutes, Patricia repeated. Security will escort you. Dylan walked to the door, paused, looked back at me one more time. You destroyed me. No, I said quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just followed your instructions. He left without another word. Through the glass walls, we could see security flanking him as he walked to his office. Someone had already brought boxes. The entire floor watched as Dylan Harper, the man who was going to revolutionize our company, packed his desk under supervision. Robert turned to me. Emily, can you work with a T to get us operational as quickly as possible? Already have a plan, I said, pulling out my laptop. We'll need to rebuild the encryption framework from scratch, but I archived the configuration settings on a separate system. With Kevin's team, we can have manual payments processing by end of business tomorrow, full automation restored by Tuesday. You archived the configuration, Kevin asked, surprised. 3 years ago, when the backup system was declined, I've been maintaining it manually ever since. It won't restore the key, but it'll speed up the rebuild. Robert looked at me for a long moment. The director position is open, effective immediately, interested. Let's get through this crisis first, I said. Then we can discuss the future. As security escorted Dylan out of the building, his boxes of belongings in hand, I stood at the window watching. He looked up once, saw me there, then got into his car and drove away. I'd probably never see him again. His reputation in the industry was finished. No company would hire someone who'd caused this level of catastrophe through sheer arrogance. The conference room began to empty as everyone rushed to damage control, but Robert lingered, standing beside me at the window. You could have stopped this, he said quietly. Yes. But you didn't. I followed direct orders from my supervisor. Everything is documented. He nodded slowly. Remind me never to give you a stupid order. I don't think that'll be a problem. Robert. The door closed behind Dylan Harper at 9:47 a.m. Thursday morning. The soft click of that exit might as well have been thunder for how final it sounded. Through the conference room windows, I watched the rest of the office slowly return to their desks, their expressions a mixture of shock, relief, and morbid curiosity. The king was dead, and everyone was wondering who would claim the throne. But I had work to do. Emily, Robert said, still standing at the head of the table. I need to know we can fix this. The board is going to want answers in an hour. We can fix it, I said, opening my laptop and pulling up the recovery plan I'd been mentally preparing for the past 48 hours. Kevin, can you get your team in here? Within minutes, the conference room had transformed from a courtroom into a command center. Laptops, cables, and technical documentation covered every surface. My archived configuration files became our blueprint for resurrection. How long have you been maintaining these shadow backups? Kevin asked, scrolling through the files I'd preserved. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, I replied. Since the day management declined my backup proposal. Patricia laughed, a short, sharp sound. You knew this day would come. I knew something would happen eventually. Systems without redundancy always fail. It's not a matter of if, but when, and who's holding the matches when they burn. We worked through the morning, through lunch, into the afternoon. I coordinated with IT, HR, and finance, orchestrating the manual payment processing that would at least get partial payments to employees by Friday afternoon. Not perfect, but enough to prevent complete disaster. At 3 p.m., Robert returned with the board's decision. Emily, the director position is yours if you want it. The board was impressed with your handling of this situation. I looked up from my laptop. My handling, I deleted the file. You followed orders from a superior who threatened your job. The audit logs are clear. More importantly, you had the foresight to maintain unofficial backups despite budget constraints. You've shown exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need. I need 2 conditions, I said. Robert raised an eyebrow. Already negotiating. First, I want full authority to implement the backup systems I've been proposing for 3 years. No budget arguments, no bureaucratic delays. Done. Second, I want Kevin promoted to Senior IT Director, reporting directly to me. He's been carrying this department despite inadequate resources. Kevin looked up, surprised. Robert nodded. Also done. Anything else? A written acknowledgement that following direct orders from superiors, when properly documented, cannot be grounds for termination. Robert actually smiled. You're going to be a formidable director. Emily, fine. Legal will draft it by Monday. The rest of Thursday blurred together. Emergency meetings, phone calls, manual payment authorizations. By 6 p.m., we'd processed payments for all hourly employees and anyone who'd flagged financial hardship. The rest would be completed by Monday. As the office emptied Thursday evening, I stood in what had been Dylan's office that morning, now mine by default, if not yet officially. The Seattle skyline glittered beyond the windows, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded within these walls. Sarah knocked on the doorframe. Emily, we're grabbing drinks to process everything. Want to join? Thanks, but I'll pass. Still have a few things to wrap up. She hesitated. Did you know? When you deleted that file, did you know what would happen? I turned to face her. I knew that following orders precisely as given is never wrong. Documentation is everything. Sarah, remember that. She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Noted, boss. Boss. The word felt different now, not taken or stolen or claimed through bluster, but earned through patience and precision. After everyone left, I sat alone in the executive conference room where Dylan's career had ended just 12 hours earlier. The audit logs were still pulled up on my laptop, that beautiful damning line of text deleted per direct instruction from Director Harper. 11 words that changed everything. I thought about Dylan, probably at home now, maybe drinking, definitely raging about the injustice of it all. He'd never understand that he'd orchestrated his own downfall. Men like him never did. They confused confidence with competence, volume with value, power with leadership. But real power wasn't about giving orders. It was about knowing when to follow them. It was about understanding that sometimes the most devastating weapon in corporate warfare was simple compliance. Malicious compliance, perhaps, but compliance nonetheless. I closed my laptop and gathered my things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The payment system to fully rebuild, a department to restructure, a company to stabilize. But tonight, I'd go home, pour a glass of wine, and toast the beautiful efficiency of corporate justice. Dylan Harper had thought he was teaching me a lesson about authority. Instead, he'd learned one about responsibility. He'd wanted me to follow his orders without question, and I had, perfectly, precisely, devastatingly. As I walked to the elevator, I passed the spot where Dylan had been escorted out. No trace of him remained, as if he'd never existed at all. In a few weeks, he'd be just another cautionary tale whispered at industry conferences. The director who deleted his own career with a single, stupid order. The elevator doors closed, and I smiled at my reflection in the polished steel. Emily Parker, Director of Finance. It had a nice ring to it. Sometimes the most effective payback isn't about bending the rules. It's about following them so precisely that your opponent brings about his own downfall. All you need to do is give him the means and step aside. Dylan Harper had handed me the rope himself. I'd simply done what he'd asked. And that, I thought as I walked to my car in the quiet parking garage, was the most perfect justice of all. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate justice. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of workplace revenge, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever dealt with a boss like Dylan? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments.